It's important to humanize migrants. They're quite often discussed as numbers, as a problem. They're people, and ensuring that the characters in your story have humanity and dignity is part of getting people to care.
Welcome back, everybody. Richard Baker, founder of Collective Responsibility, here today with another episode of the Sustainable Ambassador Podcast. Through this podcast, I'm speaking with professionals, authors, academics, government leaders about the work they're doing to solve some of the big challenges that we face. In this episode, I'm extremely honored to be joined by the author of Nomad Century, Gaia Vince. Gaia is an award-winning science writer and author, Anthropocene researcher, global strategist, and speaker is particularly interested in the action between human systems and Earth's planetary systems. Thank you very much for taking the time to meet with us, Gaia. I really appreciate the time and your insights and experience from not just writing this book, but also just your body of work and the experience that you've had over a number of years in this space.
No, it's a great pleasure, Richard. Looking forward to a chat.
So as a starting point, it'd be great to hear a personal introduction about the work that you're doing, the mission that you're on, and how you got into it.
Started off as an editor at the journal Nature and at New Scientist magazine and various other places. And one day I realized that I was sending out lots of reporters to look at various aspects of our world, whether it was a new paper that was showing increase in sedimentation or a species going extinct or ocean acidification or something. And I realized there was something kind of interesting that was going on in that all of these things were actually related to us. So I quit my job in London and I bought a one-way ticket to Kathmandu, and I thought I'll try and give it 6 months. 2.5 years later, more than 50 countries in, I came back and wrote up what I discovered, which became my first book, Adventures in the Anthropocene. So I've really been exploring that interaction between human systems and planetary systems, how we change the planet and how the planet changes us, and where we're going with that. And my latest book, Nomad Century, really looks ahead at the future, at the fact that we are warming the planet, we're heating it up, and that extra energy is driving these much more intense and frequent storms, heat waves, drought, fire, these hugely kind of violent events that force people to leave their homes. And I looked ahead and I worked with scientists at the UK Met Office on their climate models. And I asked them, tell me where we're headed, 2050, 2070, 2100. What does it look like? What are the extreme conditions? Can you map the extreme conditions that we're expecting? And I call them the 4 horsemen of the Anthropocene, these 4 factors that force people from their homes, and, fire, floods, heat, and drought, which make it unlivable. And they did that. And I realized that by the end of the century, and increasingly as we go, we are making the planet increasingly unlivable. And the consequences are people will need to move. And we're not talking about it. We're not talking about it, and we're not planning for it. And so I guess I wrote Nomad Century out of a sense of frustration. And it's a book of solutions. It really sets out how we're going to solve these problems.
What compelled you to take on the subject of nomads, or the impact of climate change as a multiplier that drives more migration and moves people out of their homes into other areas or into other circumstances?
In my journeys around the world, I met a lot of climate migrants, a lot of people that have had to move, and they don't necessarily see themselves as, refugees or climate, they don't recognize often that climate is the main cause of their movement. Andean farmers who have had to leave because of chronic drought over many years, and they end up in the shanty towns around Lima. These people might consider themselves, and that might be considered, economic migrants, but the cause of this movement largely has been climate change. And there's some interesting papers out at the end of last year. There's a direct correlation between drought in the growing season in Mesoamerica, in Central America, and the number of migrants coming to the US border. It's a direct relationship, and I think that's really, really important. So, it's partly my my experience there, but also, the fact that people are not talking about this, that they're not planning it, that we're not getting this honesty from leaders, and that migration is being framed in such a negative way at the moment.
So when you were coming up with the idea for the book, or when you wrote your first, say, pitch or the first brief, did you have a specific story that you already wanted to tell? Or did you start with, say, a list of questions that you wanted to answer, knowing that there was something that would come out of it in the end that was really a fascinating story?
Well, my previous two books really sort of led up to it, because I was looking at the future, and these are questions that I've been dwelling on and thinking about for a decade.
And who were you trying to educate or influence when you were thinking about this book? Like, who did you want to speak to, or who were the individuals that you thought would be, who should read this to make an influence somewhere?
The book really charts, where we're going in terms of the planet, how, what kind of conditions we're going to experience in different places. But it also looks at the history of human migration, which is a completely normal phenomenon. That is a great cause of our success as a species, the fact that we make networks and we use them to get by, to get around. We've always done it. Human mobility is completely normal and completely natural. And it's the way that we have excelled in our cultural and human evolution. And I wanted to put that in perspective, but also move forward and say, well, going ahead into the coming decades, we can expect a very strong pattern of human migration, and not just of people, but also of capital, of resources, of investments, of expertise, of agriculture, wealth. Everything is going to shift north. And we can talk about this honestly and plan ways of managing it. We can't stop it. We can't turn people back. That's not pragmatic. It's not possible. But we can certainly do something about the numbers of people that come. We can reduce that by helping people live in unlivable conditions through adaptation, through making sure that they have safe places and they are, that they are helped in their own home places, their own hometowns, because people don't want to move. The majority of people don't want to move. They would rather live in the places where their family is, where they speak the same language, where they have ties to jobs and childcare and elderly care and all of that. So if we can help people to stay, that's in all our interests. But the people who do move, we need to, we need to use that as a solution as well. We all across the world, but particularly in the wealthier places in the north, whether it's the United States, Canada, Europe, Japan, we have this massive demographic crisis, and our economies, our standard of living absolutely depends on immigration. That's the only way that we can keep that labor market going. And if you talk to any economist, they know this. Government leaders, however xenophobic they are, however they say, deport people, take people back, they might be saying that with one hand. With the other, they're trying to get people in, because there are shortages, labor shortages across the board in every single sector.
How much of what you're seeing is planned versus, say, reactionary in terms of migration? And when it comes to like being inclusive and bringing them into our countries or bringing them into our cities, is there a difference that you're seeing, like when a country is saying we need more urban migrants to come in and plan and build our economy versus, oh my God, migrants at the border? Like, is there a difference in how they're treated? Is there a difference in how they're able to find opportunity? Like, what were some of the things that you found in that respect?
Well, I think when people are forced to move, that is a failure of planning, because we should be on top of that. Disasters now are to be expected, and they occur frequently. As I said earlier, people don't classify themselves quite often as climate migrants. They don't see that. So they might take advantage of, job opportunities that come that way, but their job opportunities, they wouldn't even think about it or find it necessary had they not been repeatedly flooded out of their village or town, or, living in circumstances that push them to find that. ultimately, we need to be planning our cities and we need to be planning our industries, our education facilities, training around a growing population. I mean, the population of the planet at the moment is 8 billion. It is going to go up. We need to be planning around that increased population anyway. And building that infrastructure and that housing. And many places are not. They're not doing it for their existing citizens, let alone for, for new citizens that are coming in. And that's where the conflict lies, because then it's very easy for a populist or nationalist leader to say, well, the problems that you are facing, our policy failures are actually due to immigrants.
And so I want to change this a little bit and ask, you're an author, you're a researcher, you've traveled to 50 countries just for basically on one storyline. How do you approach the work that you do as an author to tell these stories about really complex issues that oftentimes are seen as too far away for some people, but that you need to kind of create that intimacy or that tangibility to the topic so that people act on it?
Complexity is beautiful, and I think it needs exploration. I mean, to draw it all together in a book is difficult. I focus on the personal for those narratives, to tell individual stories, so to humanize an experience that we're going through globally. But then I also zoom out to give that macro planetary perspective as well, which I also think is really important and missing from a lot of this, because it is difficult to see these things as what they truly are, which is planetary crises or planetary problems that involve complex systems of which we're just kind of tiny little grains in. So it's a mixture really of both of those.
I'm just curious, like, how do you create an audience around this? Because a lot of us are trying to learn how to tell the story of these challenges and the impacts if we don't do something. What I found is, like, generally, if I'm talking like big macro systems, I'm bringing the more academically oriented. It could be students, it could be policymakers. But if I talk to more of the human stuff, it just has a much broader base, but they tend to be more, they want to know more about what it means for them. And I'm curious, like, what have you found in your writing or in your research? And, do you think about that when you're writing, or you just try and find a nice balance and, just answer the questions that you start out with?
I don't really think about a particular sector of audience. I mean, I think it does have broad appeal. So I give talks in academic institutes, in policy forums and that sort of thing, but also, at cultural fairs, music festivals, book fairs, all of that. So it's a mixture. I mean, I'm sort of the literary end of nonfiction. So I kind of span both of those areas, I think.
So if I compare policymakers to someone at a music festival, do you talk to them the same way? Do you expect different things? Like, how different are those audiences?
I assume a different level of understanding of the issues that I'm talking about, depending on the audience, of course. And I try and gear my talks to those different audiences, to what I think is going to be more interesting or more appealing to that audience.
Who's doing this right? Like, who do you think offers an example for others to learn from when it comes to, understanding the challenges of migration, or, finding really good policy or economic solutions to, improve the efficiency or improve the experience from the migrant's own perspective?
Yeah, well, different places are doing things that work in different ways, more and less successfully. I mean, I give examples in my book of a project in Spain that worked very well outside Madrid, for example. In Canada as well, there are a lot of programs that have been really, really positive. Alaska in the United States has made a very progressive stance towards inclusion and programs to help immigrants. So, different cities and different mayors are trying different things that have different levels of success. And I just think at the moment, we need to change the narrative really on migration being something that we need to stop or prevent, because it's a nonsense. Migration has always occurred. Human mobility is completely normal and natural. And it's only a problem if it's completely unplanned and we don't try and accommodate these new citizens.
Politically speaking, though, we're in challenging times. A lot of countries are kind of closing in on themselves. And I'm curious, like, how do you see that playing out then? If you see a lot of nationalistic policies, will migration and migrants just move somewhere else, or will they keep going to where they're going and the friction just gets greater?
Yeah, well, it's a bit of both. That's what we're seeing. So those who can afford to and make that choice are choosing with their feet. So in Britain, for example, since Brexit, we've made it very hard for people to immigrate who, as students, as university students, or as doctors, or in various sectors of society. We've made it very difficult with either punitive visas, very expensive visas, or not being allowed to bring their families with them, all those sorts of things. And as a result, we've seen the absolute hollowing out of many of our institutions. It's left, those sorts of immigrants are voting with their feet and choosing rather to go to Germany or various places where they are more welcomed and they can see a future for themselves. So those people can choose. Other people who have no choice, refugees, for example, are just finding themselves in increasingly desperate, hostile situations, and it's causing unnecessary death, suffering, and it's not helping the economies of those countries because they're not often allowed to work. It's very expensive to keep people sort of on the edge of livelihoods rather than helping them, giving them agency and helping them get on with their lives. So everybody suffers really from that. And if you force people into situations where they're so desperate that they have to join black market economies or steal to survive and all of those sorts of things, or make dangerous crossings, and that's of no benefit to anybody, to the host country, the country of origin, the migrants themselves. It's not a solution. So we have to be more grown up about this. We have to be more pragmatic. And yes, we are in a situation where this narrative, this negative narrative, this toxic narrative about migration has been allowed to fester and is not being challenged properly. And the result of that will come home to roost quite soon, because it is so negative and it will have to be dealt with. It's not, migration is not going to go away because of this. And so there will have to be a change just for pragmatic reasons.
So speaking of that, if your hospitals don't have staffing, your construction sites don't have staffing, like all these sectors are missing productivity and people, does that then change the tide? Like, is there a way to make that a little bit easier?
Well, yeah, it takes planning. And at the moment, there's every now and again, there's a sort of like forgiveness of visas and so on, where these, there'll be a government program where, they will allow people to leave to remain, and that means the economy can go on. If the US immediately expelled all of its migrants, and it would absolutely, the economy would completely close, and it will need to be dealt with. And at the moment, we have this very kind of immature process, which is driven by election cycles and populist narratives, which is one of the reasons why I think we need to deal with this on a global scale with global agencies where nations are signed up constitutionally to this. So even when governments change, there is a recognition that a certain number of immigrants will need to be settled unless you negotiate with another country and do trade-offs. But this is, human movement, and it sort of stays. And then the policy debates can be about, whether more people should be moved into AI training or into nature restoration or into construction or whatever. That should be the level of the debate, rather than, are we going to deport everyone? Are we going to send people back? The debate needs to move on, and it needs more honesty and it needs more pragmatism.
So in that respect, I have maybe a bit of a challenging question for you here. If you are a newly minted government official, you just got elected in, you have to fix this problem. What are 3 things, like their intention is to do this the right way? What are 2 or 3 things you would tell them that they should look at, do immediately? Like what are 2 or 3 things that they could do or learn about to get a little bit further along in that path, to get it done the right way?
Simple things like planning housing infrastructure, ensuring, citizenship awareness classes, so they understand how the systems work, how does it work? All of those sorts of things that make life very, very difficult. But also, language classes, and also forming those collaborations with the private sector, with industry. You know, how many traineeships do you need in your painting and decorating firm or your heat pump installation business or whatever it is, you know, because this is how the economy needs to progress. And so if we are going to plan for the next decade, we need to do it practically. We can't live in denial that this is even going to happen.
That same elected official, they need to figure out how to tell the story in the right way. As a storyteller, how would you tell them to, what advice would you give them to approach that?
Well, I mean, it's important to humanize migrants. You know, they're quite often discussed as numbers, as a problem, as a sort of avalanche. You know, they're people that happen to have been born in a different place, and ensuring that the characters in your story have humanity and dignity is part of getting people to care and getting people to invest in your characters and in your narrative.